بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم به نستعين الحمد لله الذي جعل الحمد مفتاحا لذكره وسببا للمزيد من فضله ودليلا على آلائه وعظمته ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين أرواحنا له فداء. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإن طائفتان من المؤمنين اقتتلوا فأصلحوا بينهما وإن بغت إحداهما على الأخرى فقاتلوا التي تبغي حتى تفيء إلى أمر الله فإن فاءت فأصلحوا بينهما بالعدل وأقسطوا إن الله يحب المقسطين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته جميع المؤمنين والمؤمنات. First and foremost, I give my condolences to the Imam of our time on the Wafat or Shahadat of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Imam Hasan al-Mushtaba alayhi salatu wassalam, according to one of the rawayat. The other rawayat is on the 7th of Safar. In any case, as we commemorate these two great individuals among the Ahlul Bayt, the Ahl Kisa, as we also know them as, I want to speak about one of these shared aspects of their life. And inshallah, through this lecture, hopefully our political acumen will become a little bit more honed, a little bit more sharper, our understanding of the politics, or at least an aspect of politics, aspects of the society, and especially as it is something that is at the forefront of even what is happening in the world today. So what I want to speak about is the divine principles, or at least a part of those divine principles of peace and war. And this is something that exists or plagues mankind and humanity. What are the things that we need in order to, or at least we need to consider in order to establish peace among humanity? What are those things that, again, we need to consider, or by which we may actually end up in war? This is something that we see in the Sirat and Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. There was a moment where there were battles between Rasulullah and the mushrikeen of Mecca. There were times where the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that he made peace. He made the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Likewise, life of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam, where you see that, and it was a moment of peace. Again, it was not a peace treaty signed, but again, it fell within these considerations as far as, when do you actually make peace or be at peace with the situation at hand? And when do you actually, you have to step forward and you have to defend Islam. You have to defend your life. You have to defend your country. This is something very important. This was this decision that Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, he had to make when he took that stance against Yazid. Imam Hasan al-Mushtaba alayhi salatu wasalam as well. He had to consider these things, which inshallah we will speak about today. And again, not to say that, these things have to happen, but just simply to put out those considerations that what are the things that one who is in a position of leadership has to consider, especially Islamic leadership, when it comes to, well, when are you at war, when are you at peace, and how you make that peace. In verse 9 of Surah Al-Hujurat, so chapter 49 of the Quran, verse 9, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He points out three of these things. In fact, if we take the Bismillah, which we should recite Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim before every ayah, or at least if we are, usually we do that in our beginning of everything, anything that starts with Bismillah, it has blessing. So if we have that Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim at the beginning, then in addition to this verse, then four aspects, or we can say principles, that need to be considered are mentioned in verse 49. So in the Bismillah itself, the principle of Rahmah, which inshallah we'll get to these things. The other three which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions in verse 49 that has to be considered is this aspect of baghi. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in verse 49, verse 9 of Surah Al-Hujurat, He says, "In ta'ifatani min al-mu'minina iqtatalu." So if two groups among the believers. But when we look at these principles, as we shall enumerate them, there are about 6 of them. As I said, 3 of them mentioned here. When we look at them, one of the things that's considered is this idea that whether believers or not believers, in ta'ifatani min al-mu'minina iqtatalu fa aslihu baynahuma وَإِن بَغَتْ إِحْدَاهُمَا عَلَى الْأُخْرَى. This idea of baghi, of aggression. So that has to be considered or at least factored in to the scope of, well, hey, do we make peace or do we defend? Why? Because one group may be an aggressor, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, فَقَاتِلُوا الَّتِي تَبْغِي. And the one who is aggressing, then yes, you fight. Again, because you have to defend yourself. Because if a group is aggressive against you, you can't just sit and, okay, well, we're not going to do anything, and they're just going to aggress upon us. No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, you defend yourself. So, you defend, and you defend to what point? He says, حَتَّى تَفِيَ إِلَىٰ أَمْرِ اللَّهِ. So, what is the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So you fight until that command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is restored. And just in general, so that we will understand, but we'll get to that, that command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from His creation. His creation. Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, when we read the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants His creation to kill each other, yusfikud dima, to shed blood? Absolutely not. That was the question that the angels, they asked. They said, oh, yeah, Allah, you're creating humanity, and just like that creation before them, and that's where the question came from, when we read the tafsir of that verse, that they shed blood. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, no, there's something else here. So He did not create His creation, humanity, to what? To shed blood. He created them to do islah between each other, to have that state of peace. But sometimes it is the unfortunate nature of humanity, that baghi is one of those examples, that aggression, sometimes greed, injustice, which leads to a point that, yes, war has to be established in order to do what? In order to set things back on the right course. And so that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, He gives that goal. He says, yes, if you're going to fight, if you're going to defend, hatta tafi ila amrillah, until that command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is restored, until that peace is restored. So what has to be considered? That command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The other thing is justice, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states or He points out. And I'm just pointing these out very quickly so that we can move into the discussion. But just these 3 things are mentioned in this verse. So aggression has to be considered. That command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a state of peace that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from humanity, wants from His creation. And as He said, He's created us of different tribes and nations and different languages, different colors, not to fight one another, but what? لِتَعَارَفُوا, to come to know one another, to have that moment of peace. So we have to consider that aggression. We have to consider that command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have to consider, again, this aspect of justice and what justice is and the establishment of that justice. As I said, that first principle, and this is the first principle, the aslu rahmatillah, or rahmatul ilahiyya. This is the first principle of peace and war. First thing that has to be considered. And that is to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as He Himself, He states in the Quran, and He's emphatic about this because He repeats it more than once. And this is how we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's emphatic about this idea and this concept of His rahmah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كَتَبَ رَبُّكَ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ الرَّحْمَةِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written, has prescribed for Himself ar-Rahmah. In fact, each and every day, how many times we use the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. And again, it's part of our command, our duty, our responsibility when we make salat. So this principle of the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that has to be considered. That meaning that the world and existence and humanity cannot be deprived of the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's one thing that has to be considered. In other words, that, if we don't fight, or if we don't defend, or if we don't stand up for what is right, will the situation be such that tyranny will spread, that tyranny will reign without any place, without any safe haven, where at least the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be experienced or exist in the world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, He's emphatic, as I said, about this rahmah, this principle of rahmah, that it has to be in this world, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He sent Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that He sent the Prophet rahmatan lil alameen. He sent the Prophet to be what? To represent and to embody His rahmah. So that principle of rahmah has to be considered, whether, do you stand, do you fight, or do you make peace? Because sometimes that, yes, if you fight, then that rahmah will cease to exist. I'll give you one example. Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. After Rasulullah, and by the command of Rasulullah, he says, your right is going to be usurped. Don't stand up. Don't rise up. Why? Because if you rise up, then this maktab, or this faith, which is built upon the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this revelation, which is the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to humanity, that at that point it will be gone. Why? Because people will be confused that, this is, yes, Amir al-Mu'mineen, the companion of Rasulullah. And he's fighting who? Other people who are the companions of Rasulullah. He says, and at that point, in that time, a lot of people will be confused. So Rasulullah says that your rights will be reserved. Don't rise up. So if he rose up, then what will happen? Then that rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be forgotten. So he had to make peace. Same thing with Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba alayhi salatu wasalam. If we truly examine his position and why he made that treaty with Muawiyah. But that rahmah, one of the things that we have to understand, it is not a position of weakness. As Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam, in the sermon 179 in Nahj al-Balagha, he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Yusuf bil-Rahmah, or Yusuf bil-Rahmah, la bi-raqqa, rahimun. Sorry, he says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is rahimun, la Yusuf bi-raqqa. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is rahim, He's merciful, but that mercy is not described as a weakness. So don't think that, again, we have to consider this principle of rahmah, divine mercy, that it is a position of weakness. Okay, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he's not standing up to take his rights. And even when some said, yes, hey, stand up and take your right, he says, okay, bring me 5 people who shave their heads. Again, how many people came? Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba alayhi salatu wasalam, when he made that peace treaty with Muawiyah, again, it wasn't from a position of weakness. Unfortunately, those who were around the Imam, some of them, they thought that's what it was. Said, oh, well, how come you're not fighting? And it's very important for us to understand these principles of peace and war. Why? Because even when the Imam of our time, Jafar al-Sharif, when he reappears, one of the things it says in the Rawa'iyat at that time, that with the dhuhur of the Imam, that he will, in the beginning, he will not make, again, he's coming to make peace. He's coming to make sure that peace and justice is established in the world. But there are others who don't want that peace and justice. Why? Because they don't want to live a life of justice. So therefore, what has to happen? Again, he's going to rid the world of injustice, which means that he's going to have to fight. And in the Rawayat, it says that some people, they will begin to doubt. They will say, oh, that's, why is this war going on? Why is this war continuing? It's supposed to be the Imam. He's supposed to establish peace and justice. But it's not him that is refusing to make peace and justice. It's those other individuals. And we'll get to one of those characters that, again, it has to be considered with regards to peace and war. But if we don't understand these principles, then yeah, we may get confused. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Rahimun la yusaf birqah. This is not a position of weakness. Why? Because part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rahmah, just to give you an example, is again our life. The water and the food that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He creates and He provides for us in this world. Our family, our friendship, our community. All of these are the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rahmah. And it's not a position of weakness. The second principle which has to be considered in peace and war is aslu tabligh tawheed, the principle of presenting tawheed, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the thing that, again, each and every prophet that when they were sent, that they came to do what? To teach mankind. If you look at, again, read Surah Al-Anbiya, if you read all of the stories of the Anbiya, what did they come to do? They said, oh, well, stop worshiping these idols, stop worshiping yourselves. Qul la ilaha illallah. Say la ilaha illallah. That this principle of Tawheed is most important. Very important. Even Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali bin Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam in the Battle of Siffin, even Imam Ali, he stated what? In the Battle of Siffin, when someone came and asked him about, oh, why do we have to believe in La ilaha illallah? Why do we have to believe that there's one God? Some got upset. I mentioned this so many times, but again, this is why Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam, he says, no, let him ask that question, and he must ask that question. He says, if the others had asked this question, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be on the battlefield. Meaning that asl, that principle of ensuring that La ilaha illallah is established, is very important. Why? Because La ilaha illallah is also connected to that previous principle, the principle of what? Rahmah, the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the very beautiful, you could say, analogies in this regard. It's a hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He says, Ya Ali, he says, ما مثلك في الناس إلا كمثل قل هو الله أحد الله صمد في القرآن. Subhanallah. He says, Ya Ali, he says, if you want to understand that, what is, again, the parallel of Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam with this idea and concept of Tawheed? Now, I'm going to explain this really as well. He says, Ya Ali, he says, you are like, again, Surah what? Tawheed, Surah Ikhlas. In other words, the walayat of Imam al-Mu'mineen Ali bin Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam, the walayat of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wasalam, meaning that they're not parallel, they're not equal, but is on the same plateau. Why? Why? One of the things, very simple, that we can understand is what? That the Prophet of Allah, when he was given Surah Tawheed, Qul la ilaha illallah, what did he have to do? He had to deliver it to humanity. He had to deliver it to his community. When it came to the walayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen, what did he have to do? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded, بَلَّغْ مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ. Deliver that message. And if you don't deliver that message, it's as if you haven't delivered anything. Why? Because it is the walayat of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus wasalam that will do what? That will protect that message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is one aspect of it. Another aspect of it, that why is the walayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen, why is the walayat of Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus wasalam, that the Prophet is putting in parallel with this? And he says at the end of this, he says that if someone loves Amir al-Mu'mineen, loves him completely, he loves the Ahlul Bayt completely, then he says, yuhibbu, like the people, if people love Amir al-Mu'mineen, كما يحبك أهل السماء لما عذب الله أحدا منهم بالنار. He says that if someone loves Amir al-Mu'mineen, and it just doesn't end with Amir al-Mu'mineen, with the Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus wasalam, as the people, as the existence that lives in the heavens, as they love Amir al-Mu'mineen, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not do what? He will not punish that individual who has such love for Amir al-Mu'mineen with the fire. In other words, they will have the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another reason, why is that? Why? It's very logical. Don't think that, oh, hey, this is an extreme. No, it's not an extreme position. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He is rahmatin lil alameen, or kataba ala nafsihi rahmah, when He has prescribed for Himself rahmah, what does He do? He sends a representative of that rahmah, and that is Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Isn't it? If it was left up to us, if it was left up to humanity, as today's world is, that, oh, well, who rules, who leaves? For some people it will be a mercy. For other people it won't be. Is that not true? Again, look at the world. For some people say, oh yes, we want this person to leave. And for them they see it as, oh, this is a rahmah, we have ease, we're comfortable. Especially if that person has no taqwa. It's like, oh, well, we have ease. Why? Because that person is going to rule in the interests of who? Of those who are wealthy. It's going to rule in the interest of those who, oh, well, hey, we have a relationship with these other people we don't have a relationship with, then for them, it's not rahmah. It's like hell. If we want to be recipients of the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that includes as well, what? That leadership that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala establishes. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He speaks about this. Again, let's put this, we may think that, oh, well, okay, yes, the Anbiya, the prophets. But even for someone who's not a prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the example of Talut in the Quran. And Bani Israel, they said, oh, hey, we want a leader. They didn't want the prophet to lead as a ruler. But he said, we want a leader. Then the prophet of Allah, he says, okay, we'll make dua. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will choose that individual. وَقَالَ لَهُمْ نَبِيُّهُمْ. Who said this? The prophet. In other words, they didn't want the prophet to rule, but yet they wanted a ruler. So the prophet of Allah says, okay, let's make dua. Who's going to choose this ruler? Am I going to choose this ruler? The prophet? Who I want just because I want this person? No. Allah will choose that ruler. Will you choose the ruler? No. Allah will choose that ruler. وَقَالَ لَهُمْ نَبِيُّهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ بَعَثَ لَكُمْ طَالُوتَ مَلَكًا. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He chose and He sent forth who? Talut, to be your ruler, to be your king. Talut wasn't a Nabi. He wasn't a prophet. But yet, that leadership and ruling is connected to what? The rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what happened? When Talut was selected, again, read those verses. As soon as Talut was selected, again, because he wasn't from this tribe or this group that was very well known and prominent, they said, oh, why is Talut going to be our leader? They began to object. begin to object to what? To the selection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the appointment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which means that they were objecting to what? The rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, there's two principles that we have to understand, that what has to be considered is, again, Tawheed. That when you embrace Tawheed, that means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in charge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His choice and what He wants rules over our own choice. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's choice will lead us to that rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah's choice will lead us to that peace that He wants among His creation. The third, fourth, and fifth principle, I'll combine these all together to save a bit of time. And also because we find those principles mentioned in the khutbah of Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba alayhi salatu wasalam. In Kufa, we find them also in that letter, in that exchange, the early exchange between Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba alayhi salatu wasalam and Muawiyah, to the point that it led to the peace treaty. So that third principle that has to be considered, whether there will be peace or whether there will be war, at least among those divine principles, and that someone like Rasulullah, someone like the Imam alayhim salatu wasalam, or someone who is following in those footsteps, at least that they are considering making their greatest effort to make the decision in this time of ghaiba, of whether we're at peace or whether at war. That third principle is what? أصل تعارض بين الحق والباطل. The opposition between truth or right and wrong. That if we're at peace, will batil, with that champion, again, that widespread tyranny, oppression, with no safe haven of what is right, with that champion the day? If we're at peace. Or if we're at war, will haqq be destroyed? Will it be forgotten? And so therefore we have to make peace. Or if we are silent and that extinguishes haqq, which again Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not let that happen. But if we're silent and say nothing, will that mean that haqq is extinguished or not? That's how it has to be considered. This is why Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam, he says that this is not a moment of being silent. This is not a moment of sitting, that we have to stand up against Yazid. But in the time of Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, he was like, no, this is a time that we have to make peace. One of the things that I mentioned before, that again, the Byzantine Empire was also encroaching upon the Muslim lands. If we are at war with each other, then what? Then the encroachment of the Byzantine Empire will be that much stronger. The fourth principle, أصل تعارض بين الهدى والضلالة. That we have to weigh and see that what will prevail if we're at war? What will prevail if we're at peace? If what will prevail is guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in the Quran, the guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in the example of Rasulullah and his Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam, then that's what we have to do. Peace. Why? Because guidance will be prevailing. That if we're at peace and guidance is going to be lost, and what will prevail? Dhalala, misguidance. Then we have to stand up. We cannot remain silent at that moment. So what has to be weighed is guidance and misguidance. And in that guidance and misguidance, or a part of that, there are a couple of subgroups that has to be considered. And one of them is baghi, aggression. That who's the aggressor and what they're being aggressive about. Is it about to remove the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and it will be extinguished? Is it animosity, udwan? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, ta'awanu 'ala al-birri wa taqwa, work together on righteousness and God consciousness. وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. And if what is going to champion the day is what? Ithmi, disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That everyone will fall into the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everybody will be at odds with each other, hating each other. Then, yeah, you have to stand up against that type of aggression and animosity. Ash-shahawat, also low and wrongful desires and wants, which again, greed is a part of that. That someone just wants things just to be greedy. Or tughyan. All of those are part of weighing the guidance and misguidance. The fifth principle that has to be considered, aslu difa' an al-Islam wa sunnat nabawiyyah. That what will happen to Islam, and this is Islam with a, you could say, a capital S, that deen that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He set forth for humanity. From the time of Adam, alayhi wasallam, until the time of Muhammad ibn Abdullah, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. What will happen to that way of life? What will happen to that idea and concept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He wants His creation, no matter what their ethnicity, language, tribe, whatever their affiliation is, to do what? لِتَعَارَفُوا, to come to know one another. To live together, peace and harmony, to live together, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To recognize the ni'mah and the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He has given us in this world. Which is also found in Sunnat al-Nabawi, and the lifestyle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the tradition of Rasulullah, and the tradition of his Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus wasalam. And this is something that Imam Hasan al-Mushtabah alayhi afdalus wasalam, that he establishes in his khutbah in Kufa after the shahadat of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi afdalus wasalam, and also in his letter, that first kind of correspondence between himself and Muawiyah until it leads up to the peace treaty. So after the shahadat of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Hasan al-Mushtabah, I'm not going to go over the whole khutbah, inshallah, you can find it and you can read it, but just the important points. He begins, Ya ayyuhan nas inna dunya daru bala'in wa fitna. Before it says that, look, this world and this dunya is an abode of bala, of calamity, of trials, of tests. And those trials and tests, it will test us that where are we standing with regards to guidance, misguidance? Where are we standing with regards to haqq and batil? Where are we standing, again, with the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with regards to tawheed? Then he says, وَإِنِّي أُبَايِعُكُمْ عَلَىٰ أَن يُحَارِبُوا مَنْ حَارَبْتُ وَتُسَالِمُوا مَنْ سَالَمْتُ فقال الناس سمعنا وطعنا يا أمير المؤمنين. Allah. Then he makes a statement, kind of parallels what is recited in the Hadith al-Kisa. He says, so then I extend my allegiance, or I request you to make allegiance to me. To do what? To be at war with those who are at war with me. Whoever I go at war with, then you are at war with me. You stand with me. In the times of war, وَتُسَالِمُوا مَنْ سَالَمْتُ, and you are at peace with those whom I make peace with. Then according to the narrative, he says that what did the people say? سَمِعْنَا وَطَعْنَا يَا أَمِيرَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Yes, we make that bayah, that whoever you are at war with, we will stand with you in a time of war and peace. But we know what happened. Imam Hasan al-Mushtabah, unfortunately, he was abandoned. How Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib how he was abandoned after Rasul. How Imam Hussein Ali also abandoned, even though he was at war. They said after this khutbah, about 2 months passed, and then Muawiyah, he began his fitna, and then there were a dissent among, again, the companions of Imam Hasan al-Mushtabah. To the point that now Muawiyah, he had made his intentions that he's going to be at war. He's going to be aggressive. So he did what? He started off towards Iraq, towards Kufa. That, okay, let's mass this army, we're going to go towards that. Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba alayhi at that point, he wrote to Muawiyah. And listen to what he says, and again, this is just a part of it which is relevant. He says, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى بَعَثَ مُحَمَّدًا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. What does he begin with? He says, look, he says, okay, you're coming. What is this aggression about? He starts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the Prophet rahmatan lil alameen. Muawiyah, if you're vying for power, then it has to be within the context of what? Of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. Are you coming to establish that rahmah, to represent that rahmah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kataba ala nafsihi ar-rahmah? That rahmah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent His Prophet as, that again, if we want to, is that your war or what you're doing, is it based upon that principle of war and peace? فَأَظْهَرَ بِهِ الْحَقِّ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the Prophet رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ to do what? To ensure that truth prevails. So that means that rahmah, whether you're at war, whether you're at peace, what has to be assessed? That will this establish what is right, what is true, or will it harm what is true and right? وَقَمَعَ بِهِ الشِّرْكِ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, قَمَعَ الشِّرْكِ, meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sent the Prophet رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ in order to remove disobedience, polytheism. وَأَعَزَّ بِهِ الْعَرَبِ عَامَّةً وَشَرَّفَ بِهِ مَنْ شَاءَ مِنْهَا خَاصَةً. And Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba alayhi he points to another principle that we didn't mention, but inshallah, and that is izzah, the dignity of humanity. That's also something that has to be assessed in principles of war and peace. What Imam Hussein alayhi he also stated in Karbala, hayhat min dhilla. That again, we will never give up our dignity. And then Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, he mentions all of the claims that, okay, well, this person said this, that person said that, after Rasulullah making claims to leadership and showing that, again, that are you here to make sure that that concept of leadership that is connected to the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what is going to prevail? Or is your intention something else? This is what Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba is questioning. But then when it came to a point that Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, he knew that, look, in order to make sure that truth prevails, we have to make peace. And in that peace treaty, I'm just going to point to two things. One of them, the Imam, he says that we're going to make peace, you'll be the Khalifa. But what is incumbent upon you at that point, أَن يَعْمَلَ فِيهِمْ بِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ وَسُنَّةِ النَّبِيِّ. That interact with the people based on the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, based on the sunnah of Rasulullah. وَيُوصِلَ إِلَى كُلِّ ذِي حَقٍّ حَقَّهُ. And make sure that anyone who has a right, that right will be observed. Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba knew that, this guy is not going to do that. But he has to do itmam al-hujjah. So that we will understand that, look, what is our criterion? What are the things that has to be considered when it comes to peace and war? And quickly I'll go over that sixth principle. The sixth principle that has to be considered when it comes to peace and war is aslu amrillah fi naqidina lil ahd. And that is the principle of God's command. What is the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Especially with regards to those individuals who break their covenants, who break their oaths. SubhanAllah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, He knows His creation. He knows that some will say, oh, you know what? Let's have peace. Let's do this and do that. But these individuals, they will not stay true to their oath. They will rip it up. They will stomp on it. They will trash it, whatever. So how do you deal with those individuals? Before we get into that principle, because again, all of this is tied into what as well? Again, that rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not just a physical and apparent thing. It has a spiritual aspect to it, which I want to just point out really quickly. And we find that in the words of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. He says, اتقوا هذه الأهواء التي جماعها الضلالة وميعادها النار. Because this is the characteristic, we can truly understand the characteristics of those individuals who break their oath. One, because we all have an oath. Every single creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have an oath. And what is that oath? First and foremost, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When He created us, when He created our souls, in Alam al-Dhar, He says, Alastu bi rabbikum? Qalu bala. All of us. Whether we are believers in this world or we're not. Qalu bala. And then in this world we're tested. Are we true to that oath to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That yes, we recognize Ya Allah, you as our creator. And we will follow what you want us to follow. So Imam Hussein, he says, beware of those desires, our nafs, because if we follow our nafs is going to tell us to do what? To break that oath with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the root of that is misguidance, and the destination for those desires is what? Is hell. Very beautiful poem, inshallah. In Farsi it says, Ba dushmanani nafs sul karadan nangast. Chun dar hame hal ba khirat dar jang ast. Har chand sukhan zi ashti migoyad khasami ast. Ke atish bas u nirang ast. Says, beware, and this is a quick translation, beware of peacemaking with the evil soul. Shamefulness. For he's always at war with wisdom of old. Though he speaks of peace, he's an enemy whose truce is trickery. And that is exactly how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He also describes those individuals, again, physically in the world, who break their oath and their covenant. And I'll just simply point to the places where we can find this. Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 91. Surah At-Tawbah, chapter 9 of the Quran, verses 10 through 14. Read those verses. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He speaks about those individuals who made an oath, a pact with Rasulullah, then what happened? Then they turned away from that oath. That these are individuals who don't want peace. In fact, as it points that they're promising peace or wanting peace is nothing but trickery, that they want to perhaps use that moment to make sure that you fall into ghafla, heedlessness, and then they are plotting, they're planning. Was Muawiyah one of them? Of course. Because as part of that peace treaty, he wasn't supposed to put Yazid in power. But the whole time he's planning, okay, how can I do this? But again, Imam Hasan al-Mushtabah alayhi wasallam, he had to weigh all of those things, even if he was one of those individuals. That what is at stake? Is Islam at stake? By war? Or by peace? Is the sunnah of Rasulullah? Is that rahmat of Allah? What is at stake here? And this is why Imam Hasan al-Mushtabah, he made that peace. That peace that also eventually led to the shahadat of Imam Hasan al-Mushtabah. That Imam Hasan al-Mushtabah was poisoned, oppressed, madhloom. Assalamu alayka ayyuhal madhloom. Assalamu alayka ya Hasan ibn Ali. Assalamu alayka ya Rayhanat Rasulullah. Assalamu alayka ayyuhal iman al-masmoom. Peace and salutations upon you, O oppressed Imam. This is how we find the ziyarat of Imam Hasan in the riwayat and among the ulama. Peace and salutations upon you, O oppressed one. Peace and salutations and the blessings of Allah upon you, son of our master Ali. Peace and salutations upon you, the fragrant rose of Rasulullah. They said when Rasulullah, when he was on his last moments of life, when he was upon his deathbed, he called out to Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ya akhi, iti rayhanatay al-Hasan wal-Husayn. Da'u Amir al-Mu'mineen, bring me my two fragrant flowers, meaning Imam Hasan and Imam Hussein, hatta ashannahuma akhir marra, that let me smell their sweet scent and their fragrance just for one last time. The Rasulullah, he smelled their sweet scent and fragrance for the last time. But if he had saw what happened to his sweet roses after him, how they were shot with arrows, both Imam Hasan and Hussein, their bodies were full of arrows and they were life. It stated, Assalamu alayka ayyuha al-Imam al-Masmoom. Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, he was poisoned. According to the Maqtal, they said that Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, Ajib, he was poisoned several times, but it was that last poison that killed him. They said that this poison was a poison that came from Rome. It even had a special name, Summu Halal. They said that when Muawiyah, he received this, some people are told him, he says that, yes, this is a powerful poison, but don't use it on a person. They said that when Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, as soon as he consumed this poison, he said that he felt it immediately, that his jigar, that his liver began to churn from the poison that he was given. In fact, that poison must have been as strong that you see that Imam Zaman, that when he's giving salutations in the Ziyarat al-Alqama, he gives salutations and salams on Imam Hasan, the brother of Imam Hussein. But how does he give that salutation? He says, Assalamu ala akhi Masloom. He's giving salutations to Imam Hussein, but he can't help but give salutations to the brother of Imam Hussein, who was Masmoom, who was also poisoned. Perhaps Imam Zaman, he's pointing to that similarity, that what happened to Imam Hasan and Hussein, that they were both poisoned. They said Imam Hussein, as he stood alone, as he was on his horse, that when that arrow was shot and it shot into his chest, not only was it a three-pronged arrow, but it also had poison upon it. Assalamu ala akhihi Masloom. And one of the other books of Ziyarah, Misbah al-Ziyarah, subhanallah. Perhaps the intention is also to show the similarities between Imam Hasan and Imam Hussein. It says about Imam Hasan, وَأَنْتَ شَهِيدٌ فَوْقَ الْجَنَازَةِ قَدْ شُكَّتْ أَكْفَانِهِ بِالسَّهَامِ. They said Imam Hasan, he was a shaheed above his janazah, above his kafan. Why? Because his kafan was ripped apart, according to some of the Maqtal, that when the body of Imam Hussein was trampled, that even the old shirt that he had on, it was ripped to pieces. That when Imam Zayn al-Abidin, when he finally came to bury Imam Hussein, he had taken some straw just simply to cover the chest of Imam Hussein, because his shirt was ripped to pieces. That these two brothers, that they had so many similarities, but Imam Hasan himself, he told Imam Hussein, وَلَا يَوْمَ كَيَوْمَكَ يَا أَبَا عَبْدِ I was in no day like the day of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Aba Abdillah. There are so many things that we can show that why the day of Hussein was not like the day of Imam Hasan. They said at least Imam Hasan, when he was parting from this world, that he had two brothers to bury him. It was Abul Fadl al-Abbas and it was Imam Hussein, who helped to make the ghusl and the coffin for Imam al-Hassan. Look at how they were so different, that even there was one point where Imam Hasan and Imam Hussein, these two brothers together, they had to bury another brother, but that brother was in the womb of their mother, that they were there when Fatima Zahra had to be buried, and they were burying their brother Al-Muhsin al-Shaheed. But on the day of Karbala, on the day of Ashura in Karbala, when Imam Hussein, when he saw his brother Abul Fadl Abbas, when he fell from his horse, he had no brother to come and help. And even when Imam Hussein, in the final moments when he fell from his horse, there was no brother to come by his side and to his aid. Even his son, he was ill and could not bury Imam Hussein. ولا يومك يومك يا أبا عبد الله إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون وسيعلم الذين